Hello, my friends, and welcome in to another edition of the Gardening Simplified show here from the beautiful studios of Proven Winners Color Choice Shrubs. She is Stacy Hervella. I am Rick Weist. We're here with our engineer and producer, Adriana Robinson, and we thank you for tuning us in, whether it's radio, podcast, or YouTube. Stacy, it's time to have a berry Christmas, a very berry Christmas, because it's the season for birds and berries.
One of my favorite seasons. You know what? As a beginning birder, one of the things I love right now is it's very easy to spot birds.
Yes.
In spring, there's a lot of potential exciting sightings, but a little bit harder to spot them with all the foliage on the trees. And now, with all the trees bare and birds in survival mode, you can make some very interesting sightings.
Absolutely. And of course, we see all sorts of birds out in the landscape, the cedar waxwings, the cardinals, and even robins. You know, I have found that people are surprised by the fact that some robins stick around for the winter period. You know, the iconic image of a robin hopping around on the grass and pulling up some worms, but it brings up the point that they're omnivores. In other words, many of these birds, robins, or we look at bluebirds or even woodpeckers, you know, they'll eat insects, but they also like fruits and berries.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, just take a look at, your average suet block. It's got all sorts of different things in it. The freeze-dried mealyworms and berries and seeds and all of that. And, a lot of people, they think about birds migrating. It's because they are insectivores. And it's slim pickings for the insectivores in Michigan in most winters. But yeah, you're right. Robins can adapt and eat other things. And we also get a lot of thaws where they might be able to pick out a big juicy worm.
Well, berries are super important to the survival of wild birds in our landscape. Now, I would guess, Stacy, that they're for the birds. I haven't been able to ask them, nor would I think they would respond, but I think there are ice cream berries, in other words, those that they really, really like, and then other berries that maybe they leave alone for a while until winter drags on, and then they finally eat them. And, it was interesting after our show last week, I had a number of people who reached out to me and said, do birds really eat holly berries? And I'm like, yes, they do.
They do, but sometimes they do like them to soften a bit. And, you bring up a good point about the first choice, really tasty foods versus the berries that they either prefer to let go through several freeze-thaw cycles. And that generally includes holly. So it's not necessarily that it's a second choice for food. It's just that I think a lot of birds are more capable of eating them after the freeze-thaw cycle has softened them. And then there's some last choice where hey, we're at the bottom of the barrel. Spring hasn't sprung just yet, and this is all that's left. So I guess I'm going to choke these down.
Would aronia or chokeberry, a topic of ours a few shows ago, where would you put that?
Oh, those would be long gone.
They'd be long gone.
Yeah, they're long gone by now. So those are definitely a first choice, which is interesting because, when we talked about aronia on the show, its common name is chokeberry, for the reason that its berries are extremely astringent. And when I say astringent, I mean it's like you take a little nibble of one and it just sucks all the moisture out of your mouth. But the birds does not seem to impact them at all. So
wow, just amazing. I mentioned cedar waxwings. It's fun to watch birds flock to trees or shrubs to eat the berries. I was looking here at Proven Winners Color Choice Shrubs. There's a juniper right now called Gin Fizz, and Stacy, wow, beautiful, loaded with berries.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons we selected that particular variety was for its heavy berry set. And, junipers in general are such a fantastic tree or shrub to plant for birds. The evergreen foliage provides excellent cover. And you do have all of those berries. Now, juniper berries don't really soften after exposure to freezing and thawing. Okay. They're just kind of like a little bit of a fleshy skin around a seed. But you'll often see all sorts of birds nibbling at the berries in a juniper.
I would say that is a plant to birds that is impeccable. First pun of the day. Sorry.
I don't know. I think you had one earlier that you might have gotten in under the gun.
Slipped by.
They happen so naturally, you just don't even realize anymore, right?
Well, there are a lot of great plants in the landscape to use for berries, for wildlife and birds. And of course, some plants also that we would consider weeds, but birds will eat the berries, Stacy, whether it's poison ivy or pokeweed or wild grapes or Virginia creeper, they'll dive in there too.
Well, that's why those become weeds, is because the birds do such a fantastic job of eating those fruits and spreading them far and near.
There's an infamous avian digestive process where, yes, they kind of semi-digest the berries and then plant those seeds around, and voila, we find them in our landscape.
You know, this is a tiny bit off topic, but this is such a fascinating fact that I just have to share it while we're talking about avian digestive systems. Did you know that fish eggs can pass through a duck's digestive tract intact? And that is how fish can spread to otherwise uninhabited ponds by fish.
Did not know that.
I mean, that is honestly, I learned this fact about 2 years ago, and I tell everybody every chance I get because it's still blowing my mind. So birds, whether waterfowl or in the trees, are truly amazing creatures.
Well, folks, that's why you tune in to the Gardening Simplified show. Look up our website, gardeningsimplifiedonair.com, because every year we get these nuggets of knowledge from Stacy where I'm like, no, I didn't know that, and that's pretty fascinating. So let me ask you, Stacy, with the birds, do you think they like rose hips? That's another thing available to them at this time of the year.
Yeah, they definitely do. Now, I would say those are ones that they probably want to soften a bit, and that might be partly due to their size. Most, not all rose hips are fairly large, probably way too large for your average songbird to pick off and fly away with. So they wait till they soften, and then they can kind of just nibble at them because they're not going to be able to, take them off the tree and fly away and snack somewhere else with them.
Well, what I love to watch is, I mentioned the cedar waxwings earlier. When they flock to, let's say, a bush, maybe a viburnum, which is loaded with berries, they'll arrive in flocks. And if you watch real closely, sometimes they'll pass berries along beak to beak until one finally swallows it. And then the whole process starts over.
I have seen that before, and it is an absolute delight. If you're lucky enough to catch it, you should absolutely spend the time to sit and watch. It's really amazing.
Well, I do think that it's a conspiracy among birds to pass along pokeweed seeds and poison ivy seeds and that type of thing, but we'll live with that. Before we go to break here, of course, coming up on Plants on Trial, Stacy's going to introduce us to a beautiful tree that produces these wonderful berries. Stacy, you had mentioned to me that some plants have a tendency, and we're showing our YouTube viewers here, to have the berries wither at this time of the year, and some retain their beautiful color and firmness.
Yep. Yeah, it's just a genetic trait that some have, and so our Plant on Trial is going to be a crabapple that is known for its fruit, even in winter. I do too. Crab apples, what's there not to love? They're just fantastic plants. And, speaking of birds, a lot of people, if they have a complaint about crabapple, it's that they get those tent caterpillars.
Yes.
Well, you know what? If you have tent caterpillars on your crabapple, all you have to do is rip that nest open, and the birds will take care of it for you without a problem. So do not despair. You don't need to get up there. Just take a stick, bust open the web because the birds can't do it, and let them take care of your tentworm problem.
We love our cardinals and all our wild birds, and yes, they take care of those types of problems in our landscapes, loving seeds and suet and berries. And we'll talk about berries next with Plants on Trial, so make sure to stay tuned. Gardeningsimplifiedonair.com. Go to the website. We put show notes there too. Plants on Trial is up next. Stay tuned.
Greetings, gardeners, and welcome back to the Gardening Simplified show. Rick Weist is here along with myself, Stacy Hervella, and in our studio, Rick has brought in his usual set dressing, and today's theme, if you can join us over on YouTube to see that, includes white pine, Michigan state tree, red twig dogwood, Rick's favorite sassafras buds, which really, not something I would have thought of, but I absolutely love them. Some crabapple fruits, and a little bit of his collection of bird statues.
Yeah, I love it. Birds and berries. And today's show is all about tweetable information, right?
Tis the season. Tis the season.
Before we dive into Plants on Trial, I've got to ask about your jewelry again. Last week, I loved that. Another new one this
Thank
week.
you. Yep. So I'm committed to getting Grandma's holiday jewelry, better known. So today's selection is this pretty funky 60s Christmas tree brooch.
That is gorgeous.
Thank you. And so it's a little bit different than normal. Like most Christmas tree brooches would be green with red. And this one is actually gold and white and yellow and blue and red. So not your typical Christmas colors, but my grandma was also not your typical, didn't have typical taste in jewelry. So
I love that. I love stories like that. It glitters almost like it's plugged in and lit up. It's beautiful.
It's a very fun one. So I'm very excited to be able to share it with a wider audience. But let's put a plant on trial.
Sounds good.
Today's plant on trial is Sweet Sugar Time Crabapple. Now, most of the time when we put a plant on trial, it's one of the Proven Winners Color Choice shrubs because that is who we are. And some of our listeners might be thinking, wait a minute, a crabapple is not a shrub, it's a tree. And you are correct, a crabapple is a tree because instead of being multi-stemmed, like, down at the base with a lot of low branching, crabapples typically have a trunk and a canopy, and that is one of the factors that make it a tree. And we actually have Proven Winners Color Choice trees that are just starting to become available in the marketplace. There was a few available last year. They will continue to increase in availability over the coming years. And so this is the first Proven Winners Color Choice flowering tree that we're putting on trial.
I think that's fantastic.
Sugar Time Crabapple.
I love that. Whether it's a tree or a shrub, Stacy, if we want to attract birds to our landscape, putting in woody plants is a good idea.
It really is one of the most important things that you can do to attract birds to your landscape. Now, truly, the best way you can make your landscape or garden more hospitable to birds is to have a diversity of habitats and plants.
Sure.
But woody plants absolutely form the foundation of that for a couple of reasons. Number one, woody plants, as opposed to herbaceous plants, woody plants are persistent all year round. So even if they lose their leaves, a deciduous woody plant or are evergreen, there are branches above ground even in the winter. Whereas a herbaceous plant, something like think a hosta or a daylily, those die back to the ground completely. There's nothing left all winter long.
And birds love to perch.
They need to have a place to rest, to get warm, to surveil the area for any predators, and of course to nest, even though that's not really something that's happening in winter. So trees and shrubs really provide this range of opportunities for birds just on their own, even if they never have a single berry or other fruit that a bird would be interested in. Just by the nature of their growth habit and structure, woody plants are super duper important for attracting birds to your landscape and supporting their health and longevity. But when you get a woody plant, like a tree or a shrub, that also has berries, now you're really doing a lot for birds because you're also providing an important food source. Now, I love crabapples. We were talking about this just at the end, the beginning of the show. And I mean, there's nothing not to love about crabapples.
And in spring, the blossoms. I mean,
that smell, when you're near a crabapple in full bloom, it's really one of the most amazing experiences that you can have. I think it turns a lot of people into gardeners because it is truly so magical. So they're really a great multi-purpose plant. Now, of course, the berries or fruits of most crabapples are very ornamental. And what happens, so you can find red fruit, orange fruit, yellow fruit, all these different colors of fruit. And most of the time at the beginning of the season, the fruits will be nice and kind of round and juicy and robust. But after, again, a few freeze thaws, they start to get a little leathery and wrinkled. And that's perfectly fine for the birds. It's not the most attractive look. And Sweet Sugar Time Crabapple was selected for its unique ability to have round, robust, juicy berries all the way into the following spring.
Oh, that's great. I saw a crab tree on my way here. I grabbed a few of the berries here for our YouTube viewers. Again, the fruit on that was plump and firm, and it almost looks like Christmas. It looks like decorations. It looks like ornaments.
Yeah, and that would be beautiful on a holiday table as a little place card or, anything like that. But some will get a little bit more leathery. So this really, now for the birds will eat the leathery ones, they'll eat the juicy ones. But the nice thing about this from a human perspective is that it's going to keep your plant looking a lot more colorful and a lot more attractive all through winter. And in fact, if you go to gardeningsimplifiedonair.com, you'll get a link to learning more about Sweet Sugar Time Crabapple. as well as pictures of it. And you'll see that we actually have pictures of it with the previous year's fruit on it, and the current season's growth already starting to come out, and the fruit still looks, perfectly red and round and juicy. So really a lot of extra ornamental, extra ornamental interest for your dollar there.
Exactly. And here in the North Country, we're all into plants that give us 4 seasons of interest.
We need it. Otherwise, winter's long and dull enough on its own unless we have a plant with multiple seasons of interest. So Sweet Sugar Time Crabapple comes to us from Jim Zampini, who was one of the owners of Lake County Nursery. It's just sort of northeast of Cleveland, big nursery area over there. And Jim Zampini was absolutely obsessed with crab apples. I mean, he just loved them and had fields and fields in his nursery of crab apples that he was growing from seed. So when you're growing something from seed as a nursery person, cross-pollination happened. You don't really know what you're going to get. And he was just looking for these natural genetic mutations. And so he made several different selections of crab apples, 3 of which actually are in the Proven Winners Color Choice Flowering Trees line. And Sweet Sugar Time is one of those. He recognized the distinctiveness of these berries holding their shape and holding their color and holding their juiciness all the way into the following spring.
Wow, fantastic. I have noticed, Stacy, in my landscape with the birds that they love broadleaf evergreens or evergreens where they can hide out, like you mentioned, from predators, kind of flit about, and then dart for something like Sweet Sugar Time Crabapple for a feast. And so the combination or diversity in your landscape is important, and adding some crabapples would be great. Easy to grow?
So easy to grow. Now, it's going to want full sun. I feel like I say that a lot, but that's because most plants do really want full sun. So full sun, we mean at least 6 hours of bright sun each day. And any well-drained soil will do. Crab apples are not particularly finicky about their soil. Now, I do want to mention, because, of course, we're talking about crab apples. It's December. We're talking about the fruit. But a lot of people are probably like, get to the flowers. What can I expect with the flowers? Because, of course, that is one of the most important parts of a crab apple. And it has white flowers. So the buds start out pink. And they open to white. And, personally, if a lot of people are like, oh, snoozorama white flowers, I would...
Snoozorama! Oh!
I would urge you to reconsider... because it is just so elegant and so pretty and such a beautiful classic look that I really think a house has room for more than one crabapple, and you should choose different colors of flowers, and this would be a great choice for white flowers.
I would agree, Stacy, and of course we as people love those flowers, but I would have to argue also that the tree is great for pollinators, correct?
Oh, definitely. You know, very good for pollinators because, of course, apple flowers are pollinated by, bees and flies and all of these great flying insects. And like I said, another great thing for birds is if they do happen to get those tent caterpillars, all you have to do is rip open the webbing and you've got a little bird buffet right there in your tree. So really pulling a lot of weight there in your landscape. Now, obviously not a great time to plant a Sweet Sugar Time crabapple right now, but it is a great idea to add it to your spring planting list and plan to put it in your landscape for this spring and enjoy a more beautiful winter next year. So for all of the details, please visit our website, gardeningsimplifiedonair.com. You'll find a link to its page on the Proven Winners Color Choice website, as well as all the details that we just discussed, and get a better look at what it actually looks like and what it will do for you in your yard. So we're going to take a little break. When we come back, we have the Gardener's Mailbag, where we are answering questions from gardeners around the country, and you won't want to miss that, so please do stay tuned. Greetings, gardening friends, and welcome back to the Gardening Simplified show with Rick Weiss and me, Stacy Hervella, and we're going to answer your gardening questions, which we're always happy to do. And if you have a gardening question, we'd be delighted to help you as well. All you have to do is email us at help, HELP, at gardeningsimplifiedonair.com, or visit gardeningsimplifiedonair.com, and you can just click the contact form and contact us right there. And that's a great way to get involved with the show. But if you want to get involved with nature and birds, we did want to tell you about the Christmas bird count from the Audubon Society, as it is now underway.
Yeah, Stacy, Audubon's 123rd Christmas bird count. Wow. This has been going on for some time, obviously, and it's held from December 14, 2022 to January 5, 2023. So audubon.org, we'll put the link there in show notes at the website, so it'll be easy for you. But you could participate. Again, that happens December 14 to January 5th.
And it's important to know to participate in the Christmas bird count if you're thinking, wow, that's a long time. You don't need to do it every day. You don't need to do it every minute of every day. Right. Just as you can participate and count the birds around you and in your yard, that provides important citizen scientist information to the Audubon Society. So whatever level you are able to participate, I know that your participation will be crucial to monitoring bird populations.
It's a great thing to do, especially if you have kids or grandkids. Lots of fun, very educational. So let's get to the mailbag. Jeffrey writes us with a question. I'm guessing this is on more than one listener's mind right now, and you are right, Jeffrey. He bought a new house, moved in July, purchased some bulbs for planting, and then lost track of them. That does happen. I just found them this week while unpacking some garage totes. Is it too late to plant the bulbs? Now, coming from the garden center industry, I can tell you from experience, as a matter of fact, I had read some amazing statistic at one time, Stacy, that as many as 30 or 40% of seed packets or bulb packages that are purchased never make it to the ground.
As many as how many percent? How much?
30 to 40%.
I believe it. And, I have had it happen to me. In fact, when I was planting my bulbs this year, which was just 2 weeks ago, so not all that long ago, my husband said, hey, there's some bags of bulbs in the basement. And I was like, nah. And he's like, yeah. And so I went to get them and I was like, no way. These and they were Acidanthera murieli, that white gladiolus. It's a spring planted bulb. And I was like, these are going to be so dried out. And he's like, you can't plant them? And I'm like, no. And he's like, well, how old are they? And I looked for the date on the package. It was 2014.
Oh, ouch.
So anyway, Jeffrey, you're in good company. And you're doing way better than I was on those gladiolus bulbs that I never got around to planting. But the answer is absolutely, you can still plant your bulbs if you can dig in the soil.
Yeah.
Now, I know here in Michigan, weather's been a little bit all over the place. We've had some really cold days, some really cold nights, but there is quite a lag time between when the temperature is freezing and when the soil's actually frozen. So if for some reason your soil is not frozen and you can get in there, obviously something like a daffodil that has to be planted about 8 inches down is going to be a little bit tougher than something like a crocus that only needs to be planted 2 or 3 inches down. But if you can get into the soil, you can absolutely plant them. Now, if you can't get into the soil, don't worry, not all is lost. I think on one of our earliest shows, we talked about how you can actually just plant them into containers. So, just take like your average plastic nursery container, get some potting soil. You can reuse potting soil if you have it, or get new potting soil, whatever you need to do, and just plant the bulbs in those containers. And you can pack them in pretty close, and then just leave them somewhere in your yard so they get the full benefit of the cold treatment, all of the winter, freezing temperatures, which they need to bloom. And then starting in, say, like mid to late February, depending on the type of crop you're growing, the type of bulbs you have, just start bringing them indoors. And then you will have a little head start on spring indoors. And you can also leave them outside, and then just go ahead and plant them in your containers, just like if you would go to a garden center or whatever and buy a pot of bulbs to put in a container with pansies and so forth. So even if you can't actually get into your soil, it's perfectly acceptable to do that and make good on your investment in those bulbs.
Now, I would comment that you can get in your soil. I've done it because coming from the garden center industry, there have been many a Christmas holiday where I'm out back with a pickaxe and a shovel and a flashlight in the dark. The bulbs at that time of the year are just like me, about 75% off. And I'm back there and my neighbors are wondering what I'm doing in the, you're wearing one of those warm winter hats that you pull over your face, the kind people wear when they like rob a liquor store or whatever. And you're back there with a pickaxe and it's like, oh boy, but they're just bulbs. Jeffrey, you can put them in the ground, pick through a little bit of that ice in the ground, but once you get them into a well-drained soil, deep enough, plant them deep enough, 6, 8, 10 inches. I've always had great luck.
Yeah, it really isn't a problem. The idea, I think, is obviously for people to plant before it gets too cold and you're absolutely miserable doing so, which did apply to me this year when I finally got around to planting my bulbs. But as you can see, Jeffrey, you are in very good company with Rick and myself, and I know I speak for a lot of other gardening people and professionals who say, we've done it, it's not a problem.
Yeah, many people find them in the trunk of their car under blankets
that could
in
happen.
spring. So, yes, you're in good company. All right, Bruce writes to us about a recent plant on trial. If you recall, a few weeks ago, we talked about Temple of Bloom, Heptacodium. And Stacy, I think that caught the attention of a lot of people. And in this case, Bruce sent us a picture, and he has a main trunk. It's a multi-trunk. So he has a main trunk, and then he has a branch that's growing from the base and is trying to determine when and if he should prune that out.
Well, and Bruce, thank you so much for your question and for sending a photo, because this is a kind of issue that's very difficult to give advice on without seeing a photo. So if you go to our show notes, you will be able to see a picture of Bruce's Heptacodium, Temple of Bloom, so you can see what we are talking about. And I have to say, given this particular growth habit of this one, I would be inclined to go ahead and remove that second branch. It's not uncommon for Temple of Bloom to be a multi-stemmed plant, but the little side shoot on this one is doing something that I don't think is going to be a great aesthetic contribution in the long term.
And maybe weak.
And could be weak, yeah. Right. And of course, I'm all about the aesthetics. Just like, if it's not going to look good, that's what I'm basing my decision on. And so, Bruce, my advice to you would be that you do go ahead and cut it off sooner than later. And I'm going to give you the advice that I always give when it comes to pruning trees, and that is that you always want to make the smallest possible wound. The bigger the wound that you make when you prune a tree or a shrub, the harder, the more energy it's going to take for the tree to heal from it. And so I would say go ahead and pruning off this funky little extra branch over there sooner than later, you're going to minimize the wound. If you wait till spring or whatever, it's just going to be a bigger plant. So my advice is, if you're out there anyway right now, you could just go ahead and do it now. It won't harm the tree at all. And, I always, when I do pruning like this, I always do the old gardener's trick of rubbing a little soil into the cut. Do you do that?
No.
Oh, I cannot stand the look of a fresh pruning cut.
Oh, it hurts.
It hurts.
It hurts.
It hurts. It's so bright and obvious. And I just feel like every time I walk by, it's just like staring at me. So I will always take a little handful of, soil, whatever's nearby, and just rub it into the pruning cut. And, you just cease noticing it. It doesn't have any, plant health benefits or anything like that. So I'm not doing it to help the plant. I'm doing it to help me. But that's a fun little gardener's trick you can keep in mind if you do decide to go ahead and make this cut now. If you want to wait till spring, that's perfectly fine too. But we do recommend that you go ahead and take that off for the long-term health and aesthetics of your Temple of Bloom.
I'm just kind of dwelling on your phrase there, funky little branch. That was a great rock and roll group in the 80s. They didn't get very far, but good group.
Yes, definitely. Again, we're always happy to answer your gardening questions, so don't hesitate to reach out to us, help@gardeningsimplifiedonair.com or gardeningsimplifiedonair.com on the contact tab. And when we come back, we are going to have an interview with meteorologist Ellen Bacca. So I know you aren't going to want to miss that. Please stay tuned to the Gardening Simplified show.
Welcome back to the Gardening Simplified show, and this week we're going to forego branching news and instead interview Emmy and award-winning meteorologist, the chief meteorologist for Wood TV8 and their Storm Team 8 forecasts, Ellen Bacca. And Ellen, thanks so much for joining us here on the show. I need to tell you right off the bat that December 22 is the day I'm waiting for, because that's when the days start getting longer.
That is exactly right. And it's a very slow incline towards longer days, but we will take it. Thank you for having me.
So, Ellen, our question today is this whole situation with astronomical, and Stacy's going to tell me if I'm pronouncing this right, astronomical versus meteorological. Boy, that's a mouthful.
That is a mouthful.
It's a lot.
But the seasons, and for me personally, whether it's the astronomical or meteorological, I'm going to go with the one that's shorter because I don't like winter. I just want to get this over with. So I would probably be a person who would like the meteorological because, Ellen, does that start on December 1st?
It absolutely does. So unlike our astronomical winter, our meteorological winter always starts on December 1st. Every year, every time. And it includes all of December, all of January, and it ends on the last day of February.
I like that because the other method, Ellen, where we have to wait until March 20, I don't like that. I just want to get this over with. Why wait, another 20 days? And here on the show, of course, we joke, Stacy, about you and your opinions on daylight saving time. So
Yes.
I would think you'd be interested also in this meteorological event.
I think it's important, Ellen, to explain why do meteorologists make this distinction? What's the benefit, to having this on the calendar? We see, okay, December 21st or 22nd or 19th or whatever is the first day of winter. So what's the benefit to looking at it from a month standpoint rather than an actual lunar or solar standpoint?
Right. And this is such a great question. Astronomical winter is something that's science-based, and it's great, and it has to do with the tilt of the Earth. And as Rick mentioned at the beginning, it talks about the time frame where we had equal daylight or we start moving towards longer days or shorter days. And it's very systematic, and it's all based on the tilt of our Earth and the rotation around the sun. But the thing is, because all of those factors come together a little differently and we have leap years and we're not completely 365 days a year technically, sometimes the astronomical winter or summer will shift by a few hours or days. And that makes it really difficult to keep records meteorologically. So as a meteorologist, it's much easier for us to have winter defined as December, January, February. Because then every single year we can compare December, January, February to one another to see changes or to see averages. So it's just an easier way to handle data for us, to be completely honest. That way we can really look at things easily instead of having to say, oh yeah, 2009, when did winter start then? Oh, okay, that started on the 21st that year, but the year after it started on the 22nd, Okay. It's just a really simplified way of getting things going and keeping things organized.
Yeah, I heard that the difference between the seasons, if you go astronomically, I got to keep these straight, is it can be as much as 6 days difference depending on
Correct.
when the equinoxes or actually fall. And that makes it very difficult to, like you said, compare season to season. 6 days is a big, big difference.
It's huge. And so just for simplicity's sake, it is nice when we can say, okay, let's just compare the months and see how that goes. And I know a lot of listeners might be like, whoa, 6 days? How is it different, from as much as 6 days? It all has to do with the fact that we've taken something that is solar, like our solar system, and try to divide it up perfectly into 365 days, and it doesn't always quite make it. And this makes sense. We have leap year,
Sure.
We have different ways of playing catch up so that our calendars can kind of stay aligned. But as a meteorologist, it's just much nicer when looking at climate or planning or snow averages or temperatures to say, okay, let's start with December 1st. Let's go through the end of February. And we know March 1st is the start of meteorological spring, Rick's favorite.
Yay.
In theory.
Yeah.
In theory. The problem, of
In
course,
theory, right? Michigan
is
does not play along.
March can feel very much still wintry. So that's the drawback to me.
So true.
So it's all about documentation and has nothing to do with how Rick feels about winter. However, as gardener,
who'd have thought?
who'd have thought, Ellen? Who'd have thought? Although as gardeners, we pay attention to something called GDD, which is growing degree day accumulation, and we try to anticipate things like the emergence of foliage or applications of fertilizers or whatever it may be, insects appearing in the landscape. And Even though I'm excited about December 22, because that's like a Christmas present for me, Ellen, our coldest weather still lies ahead because in the Northern Hemisphere, we've cooled down as the hours of sunlight have diminished. So even though now the days are going to start getting longer, usually we experience as gardeners the coldest temperatures in January and February, correct?
Yes, absolutely. And that's what's so interesting is both astronomical winter and meteorological winter account for documenting the coldest days and the shortest days. So typically our coldest weather is in February. And the reason being is our shortest amount of sunlight and our least direct sunlight for the Northern Hemisphere is in December, right? We only have 9 hours of usable daylight typically in December as our shortest. But just like a lot of things, there is a lag. So what I mean is the cooling effect of a lack of a sunlight doesn't happen immediately. It actually takes a couple of months for us to feel that complete lack in daylight in the form of temperature.
Sure.
One of the reasons why is the Earth is so covered in water, and water takes a long time to heat up and a long time to cool down. We experience that every time we go to the beach in the summer, right? The sand heats up much faster. So the same thing is happening for us on a global and monthly scale. When we lose daylight in December, we don't feel the coldest until February. When we gain daylight in June, we don't feel the hottest until July. So there's typically about a 2-month lag for us to catch up to what the sunlight did for us as a cause and effect.
Wow.
That's fascinating.
That's why you do what you do, Ellen, because that was a great way to describe, living here in West Michigan and experiencing Lake Michigan. That's exactly what happens. There's no question about it. And of course, as gardeners, we struggle and worry about the freeze-thaw cycle for our plants. And so I would think that approaching documentation of the weather from a meteorological, boy, I have a tough time with that word.
It's tricky.
I don't know how you do it on air, Ellen, but from that approach would also be important because we are experiencing some elements of climate change. So again, being able to document probably important, right?
Definitely. In fact, so usually meteorologically, what we do is we every 30 years will update the reference point for what a season should look like. So, for example, this December, we will compare to the previous 30 years. So we have, 1990 through 2020 that we have for data. And we can say, okay, this is what we have this year compared to average. And typically 30 years is like just the standard. But the thing is, every 10 years we shift the 30-year chunk that we look at. Okay, so long story short, when we did that last 30 shifts, we realized that December used to be our snowiest month, and now January is our snowiest month in Grand Rapids. And one of the reasons why is December is trending just a little warmer. So because of that, we're seeing a little less lake effect snow in the month of December, and a lot more of it is falling in January. So with that being said, being able to keep those documents and be able to look at progressions through 30 years, 60 years, 100 years, we can not only see what's average, we can see the change in average over time, which is very helpful.
Well, Stacy, it all makes sense to me.
It is. The problem is the worst is yet to come.
Exactly.
So we're not going to think about that just yet.
She is Ellen Bacca. She's an Emmy and award-winning meteorologist, the chief meteorologist for Wood TV8 and their Storm Team 8 forecast. Ellen, always a pleasure to talk to you. Ellen and I had an opportunity to do a segment on monarch butterflies and milkweed this past summer, so I know Ellen appreciates us gardeners out here dealing with the weather.
Well, we appreciate you too, Ellen.
I appreciate your expertise. Thank you so much for today.
Thank you, Ellen. Thanks for your time. We appreciate it. Stacy, it's been fun.
It's been great.
Yeah. Make sure to tune us in. Look for us on YouTube, gardeningsimplified.onair.com. Have a great week.